This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. The show starts with Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode where they converse about pond health, quality, and structure for livestock. Jason Warner and Christian Magana continue the show, explaining components of bull selection and what makes K-State's legacy bull and female sale unique and educational. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk ends the show discussing what happens with calves born to heat-stressed cows. He says they are typically about 10 pounds lighter, have a lighter weaning weight, and longevity is reduced. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show with K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken on part of their Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode.
There's a lot of ponds, somewhere around 100,000 to 200,000 ponds in Kansas, and a majority of those are used at least in some way for livestock,
Sure.
right? And so I thought I would talk a little bit about today, or we would talk about what does that mean? Is it, what does having cattle or sheep or something like that using your pond mean for the pond? Is it a good thing, bad thing, or is it just a thing? So kind of chatting through some of those details and what it means to have a livestock pond.
The vast majority of ponds that I'm involved with have some sort of livestock use, so definitely a good topic for everybody. So, when we're thinking about ponds that are designed for livestock, are there differences in livestock ponds versus ponds that would be created just for fishing, or what do we need to know about this stuff?
Yeah, a lot of times livestock ponds are very similar looking to ponds we'd have for recreation. They might be a little bit simpler in their design, and so we're not really worried about changes in depth so much for habitat. We're not necessarily worried about creating different habitats because it's primarily just going to be a watering source, maybe a cooling source. So that's kind of the goal. And so a lot of times you're just looking at them, they're going to look very similar. They can be a lot more complex if you do things like fence them out and have cattle access points. But for the most part, it just kind of looks like a pond. And so, some of the things we talked about, we just had a pond design episode recently, and, we want that 3-to-1 slope. And so you're getting deeper as you go out at kind of an expected interval. You don't want to have really steep banks, so you want to drop down about 2 or 3 feet, but then you want it to be that relatively gentle slope after that. If you have too steep of a bank, it can be hard for livestock to get in and out of the pond, and that can cause mortality. So there are some other things we might need to consider with having it be a livestock pond. But, if you didn't do this every day and you were just driving by a pond and looked at it, it would look very similar to the naked eye.
Yeah. So how big of a pond do we need, depending on how many cattle we have and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's going to depend on where you're at. So western Kansas, you're going to need a lot bigger watershed to fill up than you do in eastern Kansas. And so, if your pond isn't big enough, you're going to get water and sediment to wash in. It's going to fill up relatively quickly. And if it's too big, it's not going to get deep enough to hold that water back. So the size of the pond is going to vary a lot depending on where you're at. And then also, the watershed design and shape and how much water you're getting. So it's going to vary a lot based on where you're at in the state. Most of them that I look at are probably in that 1 acre range. That kind of seems to be an easy target where you can, easily create the pond and then relatively easily manage it as well.
So preventing the cattle from getting into the pond altogether, or only allowing them to access the pond in certain places.
Yeah, having, I mentioned livestock, and cattle are kind of the big animals that we see most of these changes occur quickly in. But any livestock can cause these issues. It just happens a lot faster with cattle. But you see things like erosion, right? And so if you think about a big cow walking along the edge of a pond, they do two things. They carry sediment into the pond on their hooves, but they're also heavy. So they're standing there on the edge, and a lot of times that can cause the banks to to erode down. So you have erosion issues, lots of nutrients being added to the pond. We think about manure that might get added or urine, and those can contain lots of nutrients, lots of contaminants. And so, because of all of that, water quality issues, there's been a lot of research that shows that keeping cattle out of a pond, fencing them off or limiting their access can be really beneficial to the water quality that's found in those ponds. And it can be really beneficial to how the cows drink that water, how much they drink. You can see daily growth changes because of that. So if cows have access to clean water, they'll grow faster. They can put on more daily weight than they will in areas where there's a lot of contamination, So because of all of that, keeping cows fenced out is generally what's recommended. Pumping water out to a nearby stock tank and allowing them to drink out of that. That's better for the cows, better for the pond, but it's not always feasible. There's a cost involved with that as well.
What about the dam? Do cattle have any effect on the integrity of a dam or that sort of thing?
That's a common area where they're walking across, right? And so I was just out at a pond about a week or two ago where the top of it had all caved in, and it had caved in because cattle were walking across it. The real culprit was a beaver that had made a dam, and the beaver was gone. But those cattle walking across that, combined with it being hollowed out by the beaver, that combination caused some of that failure. But for sure, if you're walking across that dam, the integrity of the dam can definitely be an issue. I mean, I've seen multiple cases. It's not just a hypothetical; it's a real issue where that erosion over time can eat out a dam, and if it gets washed away to the point that it's not holding back water, you're not going to have a pond very long. So It's definitely there's lots of reasons that we want to think about controlling where the livestock are going, or maybe not even that. Maybe just thinking about what's going on and making sure that the maintenance is there to account for those erosion.
Can we have a good livestock pond that's also a good fishing pond?
Yeah. I see that all the time, and then I think some of the best fishing occurs at these ponds, but it's very hard to have a really good fishing pond and a really good livestock pond without some management intervention, right? And that might be as simple as rotational grazing. So we're limiting the amount of time that the cattle have access to a pond, right? Instead of just putting them out there and forgetting them, we're letting them in there a little bit. They're having a good time, and then we're moving them somewhere else. So I think management actions, if your goal, and we talk about goals with ponds all the time, if your goal is to have good fishing, then you need to do some things with the cattle. If your goal is just to have good cattle, you need to understand you might not have the best fishery in the world, but you could definitely have fish out there. The vegetation we talked about might make it hard to fish, in some cases, and so that could be another thing that maybe you want to think about, or that risk of the fish kill. But having multiple uses for your farm pond is something I think can be incredibly valuable.
How do you know if the water's safe for either your livestock or potentially fish that you want to manage and that sort of thing?
Sure. I get asked all the time, is my water safe? And the real answer is, if you want to be safe around water, you should wear a life jacket. So by far the biggest risk of being around water is drowning. And so if you really want to reduce your risk or the risk of kids or grandkids that might be out there, wearing a life jacket is something that's important to do. But when people ask me that question, they're normally thinking about water quality, or there's just been a story about a brain-eating amoeba or something like that. And so, I think you can test all day long and we can't know if it's perfectly safe. But if you have livestock in your pond, I can almost assure you it's not safe to drink that water, and probably not something you want to be actively swimming in. There's a bunch of studies out there. A study just came out in Rangeland Ecology and Management about cattle in Oklahoma and Texas. And they showed that in 95% of the ponds that coliform bacteria were present. And in about 40 of those, it exceeded the safe upper limit for both humans and livestock. And so, it was somewhere around almost not quite half, but close to half of them have unsafe levels of coliform bacteria. A lot of them have E. coli present. And so, it makes perfect sense, right? If I tried to give you a glass of water from your toilet, you probably wouldn't be very eager to drink that down, right? And, if we're letting livestock get directly into our ponds and they're doing their business in the ponds, there's going to be some sorts of of contaminants that get into that. So those types of the bacteria levels would concern me more than things like pH or dissolved oxygen from a safety standpoint. And then there's lots of parasites that we can see that may be present in the water that are spread from fecal matter or from urine, and so things to consider. Is it safe? I guess one of the other aspects to think about is the shape of the pond. If it has a gradual entrance, that's generally pretty good for the livestock. If it has a steep bank, I've seen cows that have wandered in and it's too steep, and cows aren't the most agile animals, and so if they get into the edge of a pond, they might not be able to get out. And I've seen that happen, and especially if the pond is drying out, and so they're trying to get further out into where the pond might be softer mud, they can quickly sink down a heavy animal like that. So that is another, in addition to the water quality thing. The shape of the pond and the soft mud that might be present is another safety thing to consider.
So, Joe, what are some big takeaways that you want to make sure that everybody gets from this episode when they're thinking about managing ponds for livestock and fish and everything?
Having access to water is really important. And if we can, having access to clean water is really, really important. And so small amounts of manure in water and can really change the taste and change how much the livestock are utilizing it. So thinking about, just some of the steps we can take, understanding long-term management of those livestock ponds and actions we can take, throughout the rangeland that we're managing that can help our water sources, I think can be very effective. And taking some steps now, being proactive, can help minimize the long-term effects and make sure that pond's there for future generations and for your livestock to enjoy for a long time.
Once again, that was Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing bull selection and K-State's legacy sale. And then to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner and the Purebred Beef Unit Manager at K-State, Christian Magana. Jason, Christian, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby. Appreciate the opportunity as always.
Thanks for having us on.
Jason, as we're thinking about bull selection, what do cattle producers need to do before they go see what bull they want to purchase?
Yeah, so, I think as we move into really kind of the core bull purchasing season of the year for most of our producers around the country, I think really just keeping in mind a few basic things is really important. First and foremost, I think it's really important for all producers to have a really good plan laid out in advance of what they intend those genetic selection decisions to be, and some things that they really want to look for with regards to making those breeding decisions and those genetic selection decisions as they move forward into this coming year. And it's just a really important thing to be keeping in mind that, these genetics and these bulls that folks go out and purchase, of course, they're an investment, really important investment in the cow herd that's going to influence the composition and the genetic makeup of that resulting calf crop for many years. And so I think just having a good plan in place for the type of bulls that you're after, for the traits that are really important to you as a producer, for how you operate, and setting a budget is important as well too. As folks, kind of get into a lot of these production sales, right? It's important to understand, I think, what your budget is, and have several bulls lined out that you think represent the best opportunity for genetic progress for your operation. And being able to work through those, I think is important, because I think the last thing seed stock producers want is to sell a bull to a customer that's maybe not the right fit for them genetically, that maybe doesn't intend what they really want for them to be able to do. And so being able to make sure that customer has that right bull, that right sire, that's really going to be the best fit for that cow herd, that's really important. And so I think just taking the time to do that, having a plan in place is really critically important.
And do you see value in building relationships with maybe where you like to go buy your bulls from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to view a lot of these decisions and a lot of these purchases as certainly much more than transactional, right? I think anybody who's serious about being in the seed stock business values that relationship that they have with their clientele, and developing that relationship is really important. And as a producer, if I'm a commercial producer, I want to make sure that I'm purchasing bulls from a vendor that that understands my needs and my objectives for my cow herd, and at the same time too, is a good reputable vendor that develops those bulls that fit really, really well for the way that my operation is structured. But having that conversation, I think, with your supplier is really important for them to be able to help guide you in that genetic selection process and find those bulls that are a good fit, and focusing on the EPDs that really are the most important economic drivers for the operation. And so I really think that's important, just developing that relationship. That's important for everyone involved, and I encourage producers to approach it with that mindset.
An upcoming sale taking place in Manhattan, Kansas, the Legacy Sale, which is the 49th annual bull and female sale. Before we talk about the sale and the livestock, how does this bring K-State students into learning about how a livestock sale works?
So yes, we're really fortunate here at K-State in our Animal Sciences and Industry Department that we have a livestock sales management course, which has been around for a number of years. And we've had a lot of students that have come through that have participated in this course over the years. And it's really a fantastic opportunity for these students, regardless of what their background is, to learn about the basics with seed stock cattle production and everything that goes into it. And certainly, as our seed stock producers can attest to, there's a tremendous amount of work and decision making that goes into having not only a successful seed stock operation, but a successful production sale. And this is a fantastic opportunity for these students to learn about how we make those decisions, how we put together the data and the EPDs, in this case for our bulls and then for our heifers, and how we might think about approaching and having those conversations with producers and with customers on sale day. And so, so we're really fortunate that we have that, and that's a really core component of our legacy sale. It's very much a student-run sale, and the thing that we want folks to keep in mind is that when you support our K-State Legacy Sale, you're supporting these students, and I encourage folks that are going to be joining us there on sale day to make sure that they take time to visit with those students and get to know them a little bit as our future industry leaders.
From what the sale class does to what my student workers do on a day-to-day basis, they're learning all aspects of a seed stock operation. I'm the only full-time employee that the unit has, so we rely extremely heavily on student workers. They handle everything, from feeding the bulls, feeding the cow herd every day. They get the whole big picture from breeding, calving, getting bulls ready for pictures and videos. Then obviously we have sale day. So they're kind of getting the whole well-rounded picture of what it takes to put on a sale, because there's a lot of things that go on, behind the scenes leading up to a sale, of all the kind of legwork you have to put in to just get the cattle to the sale day. So it's kind of a unique opportunity for a lot of these kids that have maybe never had an opportunity to work around a seed stock operation before, to kind of get that exposure. Maybe they come from the commercial side of the industry, or maybe they have no livestock experience at all. We kind of get to expose them to every aspect of it. So that's one of the neat parts about working here and having the sale, is just about everything is done by students.
And looking at this legacy sale, what's being offered?
So we'll have 15 Angus bulls, 11 Hereford bulls, and then 15 Simmental Sim Angus bulls. Then we'll have 14 fall-bred females, and that'll be first calf heifers and mature cows. And then we will have 21 spring replacement females, and those will be offered in lots of 3. And the buyer has the option to take as many lots as he would like.
What are you excited about to see go through the sale coming up on March 6th?
Just with what, the cattle market is right now. There's a lot of guys that are going to start kind of trying to keep back some replacements and high quality females. So it'll be nice that we're going to offer a lot of these females to customers, and especially on the spring replacement side of things, we reach really deep into our replacement pen and are going to offer up some really, really nice heifers there. If you kind of look at all the other sales going around, I mean, it's an amazing time in the cattle industry of just what cattle are worth at the moment. So we've got a really, really good set of bulls this year, probably one of the deepest I've ever seen being around the purebred unit. I worked here as a student worker for a few years, so have a little bit of a background, but we're going to have a really, really nice set of some on-demand fall bulls to offer this year that, historically K-State hasn't had the highest of quality Hereford bulls, but I think this year we're going to kind of turn that around with that set. Then we're going to have one lone craftsman son, but I mean, he's out of one of our up-and-coming donors within our program. He's got great numbers. He's great phenotyped. He's going to be a really special bull for somebody. And he's going to be leading off the sale as our lot 1 bull. As I kind of just go through the lots here, there's another one that he'd be our lot 8 bull. He'd be a Wildcat son, and he was out of another one of our up-and-coming donor cows too. And he just had a pretty impressive yearling weight at 1,290 pounds. So on paper, he does everything right. Phenotypically, he does a lot of good things. So he'd be another special bull that I'd kind of be pushing people towards and making sure they're keeping an eye out for him as they're flipping through the catalogs.
What else can people find at the sale or in the sale catalog?
Their performance and feed efficiency tested. So we've got individual feed intake and efficiency data on all of these bulls that we collect, which is also unique, and some additional information that we'll have for people on sale day.
When and where is this sale taking place?
It'll be taking place Friday, March 6th at 4 p.m. at the Stanley Stout Center. Cattle will be on display starting at 10 a.m., but if anybody's coming through Manhattan, wants to swing by and look at the bulls, they're up here at the main headquarters, or they can reach me if they have any questions. My cell phone number is 785-565-1881.
If people want to find the sale catalog, how can they do that?
If they're not on the mailing list, they can go on the website and look up K-State Legacy Sale, and the link will take them to all of the previous sales, and they can click on the 49th annual legacy sale link, and that'll bring them to the PDF version of the sale catalog.
Christian, Jason, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby. Appreciate it as always.
Thank you.
That was K-State's Jason Warner and Christian Magana. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, I will put a link if you'd like to check out the Legacy Sale catalog. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. With warmer weather just around the corner, now is a good time to be reminding dairy farmers the calves born to heat-stressed dams are born smaller with weaker immune systems and suffer from reduced long-term health and productivity. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says calves born to heat-stressed cows are about 10 pounds lighter, have a lighter weaning weight, and longevity is reduced. He says that heifers born to heat-stressed mothers typically produce less milk per day in their first, second, and third lactations.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning heat stress and the upcoming summer months. I've worked with heat stress for many decades now, actually, and one of the things that we continue to impress upon producers is the loss in milk production that we see during the summer months, and you all are very aware of that. And it also has some other important impacts that I want to visit with you today concerning. So number one, these cows that undergo heat stress while they're in the late dry period, they tend to have a significant decrease in dry matter intake during this period. And that actually has a fairly significant impact on calves, and we're starting to understand that a whole lot better and maybe more completely. So when we look at that calf that's born during the summertime to that heat-stressed cow, typically those animals are about 10 pounds lighter in body weight, and they also have a lighter weaning weight by about almost 16 pounds, so very significant when we look at growth. However, an interesting factor that has come out is that their longevity is decreased by about 32% just by going through this stressful time while they were being carried inside the dam. So it's a issue that continues throughout their life, actually. As you look at those animals that are born to heat-stressed cows, in their first lactation, they will have a decrease in their energy-corrected milk yield, not only in the first lactation, but also in the second and third lactations. A lot of that is associated with the fact that the mammary tissue just does not have the surface area that it would for an animal that was not exposed to heat stress in utero. Now, does it just end there, or does it go to the next generation? As you look at heifer calves born out of those animals that were heat-stressed as a calf inside the womb, we also see that there's a decrease in energy-corrected milk in the first and second lactations of these animals as well. So it continues into the next generation. Now, you compound this with things that might be going on with that individual animal. In other words, if that animal is exposed to heat stress, does it make it worse, even though they have this issue that they were essentially born with? Well, most likely. So, one of the things I want to impress upon our dairy farmers as we start to look towards summer is what we're doing with cow cooling for those animals that are pre-calving. Those animals that are in the dry pens out there and the pre-calving pens, we need to be doing something about the heat stress management that we provide for those animals. Again, probably based on our research, the most economical things you can do would be provide fans for increased ventilation as well as some intermittent sprinkling so that we can get some increased cooling on those animals. Probably don't need to be as intense as we are with the lactating animals, but we do need to provide some increased wind speed for those animals as well as providing some moisture to wet their backs and then allow that water to evaporate so that those animals can be cooled. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to become aware of the long-term impacts of summer heat stress on calves that are born to dams that are heat-stressed.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.